We are recording from this end.
Okay.
Got our quorum to start with. Everybody, this is Sam James. He's our department head back home. He studies soil life, has been doing so for quite some time. He'll be leading lectures for the next several days. Kind of like we've done with the other professors, I figured it'd be good if he introduces himself. You guys come with the computer, introduce yourself, so we know each other a little bit, and we'll get into the lesson. Sam?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, all right. I started out studying soil animals and how they affect soil and the movement of nutrients in soil. And I did that in North America in some of our native grasslands. And then I've since then been involved in a lot of other different things, but mainly looking in more details at the total diversity of earthworms. So I'm a specialist in earthworms, mostly on the identification and classification of earthworms, but I've continued working with people in different parts of the world who are interested in what earthworms are doing in soils, under what agricultural conditions, agroforestry conditions, that kind of stuff. You find earthworms, and what kinds of earthworms do you find under those different conditions? So this is mostly what I've been doing as far as a researcher in biology, and as a professor I've been teaching basic biology through genetics, evolution, and soil biology, soil science, and ecology of soil animals. So now on the side, I was also for 10 years an organic farmer on large scale, kind of what Chris is used to from where he grew up and in the same area. So we were farming anywhere 10 to 100 to 300 hectares, depending on what year it was, and growing mostly, large-scale crops, maize, soybeans, alfalfa, barley, wheat, things like that. So, but most of the time I've been just doing this earthworm-related work, and I don't have a lot of detailed knowledge of using earthworms in composting, but I do know a thing or two about that, and I've got a lot of contacts with people who really have gone deeply into using earthworms to compost organic wastes. And some of them in Brazil, some in India, some in the US. So it's a technique that's widely used, and it might be beneficial there. It depends, though, on what's available, because not all earthworms can do that. So anyway, that's me, my little introduction, and so I'm now ready to meet you by way of this little screen on my desk. Who wants to start?
Hello.
Hi there.
My name is Shastri. I've studied natural medicine, and I've done a specialization in Ayurveda.
Okay.
But we have a small farm at home because the government have asked me to do a project, permaculture. So in this course, I'm trying to learn as much as possible, so I can use that at this farm.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Shastri.
Hi, my name is Roel. I work at Barbolina's farm. I got into farming almost maybe 2 to 3 years ago. So I'm trying to learn as much as I can, and to eventually maybe have my own little farm where I can produce my organic crops.
Great.
That is done by ways of being vegan. So I realized that most of my money that I was making working was going to food. So I started farming for that reason.
Ah, great. Okay. Thanks. It's nice to meet you. Yeah.
Hello,
Hey there.
my name is Rishal. I have a garden, and I am here to learn all about new techniques to improve my knowledge of gardening.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, my name is Aisha Machena. My background is accountancy. For the last 10 years, I had a landscaping company, and now I'm farming, and I want to learn more about.
Okay, so you can at least keep track of what's going on.
That's good. Yes.
Hello, my name is Polo. I'm doing some permaculture research for the government after together, and that's what I'm doing here. And I'm going to learn as much as possible, and also one of the mentors of this course. Nice to meet you.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes.
My name is Melinda. I started like 8 years ago with traditional farming with planting sorghum. And with that, we do only mainly in the rain season, but for the last couple of years, it hasn't rained so much. So I started thinking about what else to do. So I got into the food forest, let's say, yes. Food forest. Oh no, what was it again? Food forest. Okay. Anyway, and now we have started a crop. So I want to learn more about farming, and my main interest goes into nutrients and the management of water.
Great. Okay. We hope it rains.
Hello, my name is Andy Barbolina. They call me Barba. I have a small farm, mainly concentrating in aquaponics, gathers, and water. And I'm leading also a group of 8 farmers. They're starting up a project to go completely organic, biological, natural in large-scale production in order to replace some of the imported.
Good. Okay, thanks.
Hi, my name is Julian Juliana. I am farming now about like 11 years. Now I'm learning with this about organic farming.
All right. Making the conversion.
am Liliana. I have chickens. I do farming too. But I'm here for learning more about farming.
Ah,
Thank you.
okay, chicken, yes. Great. Who's up next?
Good evening. My name is Ed Alberto. What do you do? We're just meeting. Introduce yourself. I have my farm Elizabeth. I go back more upstairs. No more.
Yeah.
Can do.
Okay, good day. Right.
So that's
That's the group. Okay.
9, 10. So that's 10. We're supposed to have 17. These are some of our reliables. So
All righty.
is what it is. Yeah. You have anything else you want to talk about before we get going, Sam?
Oh, nothing in particular. I think just getting going is probably good. So just say a little bit sort of as an overview. I'll be going through some of the different kinds of soil life, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of these things just in passing through the day, maybe while you're out working on your land, or at any time you've probably seen these, or you know what they are. So you'll be looking for some specifically on your land as a homework, just so that we get a better feeling for what's present, and that you can connect what I'm going to talk about to the specific case of your place, your land, and what you're doing. So this is, I'll start with what we call the big animals of the soil. We call them macrofauna sometimes. That just means that we can see them easily. There are others that are small. You can still see them without any a microscope or anything like that, but you don't notice them very much unless you really look. So we'll begin with the big ones. They have usually a big effect, and then eventually go towards the smallest, and you know about bacteria and all the things that they are doing. But these animals are they're shaping the soil, they're moving soil around, and so we call them sometimes the engineers of the soil. In some parts of the world, these can be very important. They do as much work as a human being would do in moving of soil, almost. Or over a period of a couple of years, they can consume all of the topsoil and process it and change it and mix it and help maintain soil fertility. And they have a very strong controlling influence on the microbial life of soil. So I'll go to my little show here. I'm going to share the screen. And here. That. And now this. That should show. Come on. Yeah. So now I'm hoping what you see now looks like a big pile of soil with the word soil engineers written across it, correct?
Yep, that's it.
All right. So what you're looking at is a big pile of earthworm poop, earthworm feces, and some of it's really recent, some of it's older. There's even a little plant growing on one side. This is a humid climate with lots of rain, lots of vegetation, and lots of earthworms. So just to show what they can be doing. So what the main idea that I'm trying to convey today on this first part is that you got all of these soil animals, and they are big, relatively speaking. They help create soil structures. They make holes. They deposit their feces. So we call them worm castings if it's earthworms, or fecal pellets if it's something else. And so they also help maintain soil structures, and they also destroy. So if they eat something, that soil structure gets destroyed and something else is created, but in the process they are generating the physical characteristics of the soil. Now, you probably can recall then that soil physical characteristics depend a lot on the soil particles and the types of clay that's in the soil and how much sand, all this kind of stuff. But it's often soil animals that are mixing all of these things together and creating the within the soil little pieces or crumbs of soil that we often notice when we break up soil in our hands. This photo that you're seeing, there's an earthworm burrow right across the top middle. And you can see, if you look closely, there's two layers. There's a darker layer. There's a little bit of shadow in there, but there's like a little cutoff region where it's a little bit tan on the farther in, and lighter color. So what that is, it's a layer of modified soil. It's probably earthworm fecal material that worm used and spread over the inside of its hole. So anyway, all of this goes to create the habitat and the structure that all of the other living things in that soil are using. So we talk sometimes about ecosystem engineers in general. So not just soil, but lots of other larger scale things. So on the one side of the screen, you'll see this photo of a bunch of humps in the soil. This is created by a bunch of small animals, small burrowing mammals that move stones around, and they build these little domes of soil and stones. So they are engineers creating the structure of that environment. On the right is a North American small pond surrounded by forest, and there in the front is a dam made out of sticks and mud. There's an animal, the beaver, that makes these dams. And these are also what we call ecosystem engineers. So it's not just in soil. This is an important function of lots of different animals in different places that do these things. So earthworms are kind of in there too. This is so here you see a few different kinds of animals, an earthworm, a beetle larva or a grub, a termite off on the one side, and an ant. So these are what we call the ecosystem engineers of soils. And I'll go into what it is, why we call them that, because they change the physical arrangement of the soil and the properties of soil. They also change what nutrients are available. They change the physical locations of those nutrients, and they keep things moving around, and by their action of eating and excreting, they help generate nutrients in available form to the plants. So we got earthworms. That's one of the most important groups in most soils that will support enough plant life that we would be farming those soils. Termites can also be extremely important in tropical climates. Ants are also very important in warmer and also drier conditions, because they also move a lot of soil. And then some beetles are very important in but not as widely distributed. But there are clearly places where these small beetle larvae are making holes in the soil, and that helps allow air and water to move into the soil. Okay, so when we talk about engineers, there's just what we call two basic characteristics. One is the changing the environment by moving around the materials in their environment. So the other kind is they build the environment themselves. And so that would be things like trees, making a forest, that's building an environment with their own bodies. And corals in the sea, the coral reef structures, that is a case of a kind of ecosystem engineer that build the town, they build the whole community under the water. So today, when we're talking about soil engineers, it's which kind? It's the ones who are using their own bodies to make the place, or they're modifying their environment, you know, rearranging the materials in their environment. So it's that kind. They're the ones, they take soil materials and move around, or organic materials, plant remains, and they move those around. So earthworm engineering can be very modest size, or it can be very big. Not too far from you in Colombia, there's this area in the Amazon basin side where from the left is like a aerial view, and the right side is like if you're standing in it. These are little heaps of soil surrounded by water. These are made by earthworms living in this region. If it were not for this action, the whole area would be underwater because the water is deep between these heaps, maybe 1 meter. So this is a pretty important effect, and the people in that region have learned to grow gardens on those heaps. This is another example in another part of Colombia where you've got the first vertical view, the biggest photo, shows that you've got areas of small mounds and then long, like almost like roadways between the wet areas. And there are, when you look at it more closely, like in part B, you can see there's the edge with the little heaps on the left and the flat area on the right, and see deep into the area that's modified by earthworms. Those ordinarily get flooded during the rainy season. This is during the dry, of course, and all you see is a dry grassland. And then also in this part, you can see termite nests. These are the light-colored patches in D and also in photo A. There's a couple of light spots just to the left of the letter A, and those are relatively large spots. Those are termites. So if we look at termites a little closer, you've probably all seen some kind of termite activity. Has everyone seen? You got termites there?
Oh,
yeah. They're eating your houses, probably.
Yes.
Exterminate them.
Yeah, and trees too. You'll see nests in trees around here.
Yeah. So on the right-hand side of the screen, it's kind of dark, but that dark area is a termite nest on the side of a tree. And then on the bottom left, you see this thing like a rugby ball wrapped around a small tree with a section going up the tree. Does my arrow show up to you guys?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So this is a photo I made in Brazil, near the capital city. It's a very small tree, but it has a big termite nest on it. And so each one of these is a different kind of termite. You even have one that looks like a little mushroom or like a little house with an umbrella. These I saw in Africa. But you can see in this this photo in the center, there are lots of termite nests. They are everywhere in this area. And here's another one up on the left, just on a fence post in a pasture. So termites do a lot of things. They're not just eating wood and destroying houses. They're also active in natural areas. You know, ordinarily they would be eating dead trees lying on the ground, but to them, a house looks like just a very nice dead tree. So you probably have some times of year the termites are flying around. You know, they emerge from their nests and they fly around, they mate, and then they go and make a new nest someplace. So what we're getting at then is that we've got all of these animals that create structure, they rearrange the soil, and then because of those changes in structure and moving things around, that helps set up the environment for the growth of plants. So you might ask, you know, why do I care? Do I need to know this? Well, you know, maybe you don't, but I always think that it's better to understand what you're involved with. And when you look at something, and maybe you can appreciate it a little more if you know that it could be doing something useful. So when we look at the total amount of living stuff in soil, this triangle represents the totality. The soil animals are just a tiny little bit of the total. The microorganisms, bacteria and fungi, they're the majority. And they do a lot, but they aren't able to do everything by themselves. On this photo you can see on the right, you had soil. This is the identical soil, the same kind of plant. One of them had no soil animals in it, only the bacteria, other microorganisms. So we can't, for experiment purposes, it's almost impossible to get rid of every living thing in soil. So we know we can set up the soil so that there's no earthworms or ants or termites or something like that living in it, but there will be lots of other little things. So doing that experiment, if you had soil fauna, soil animals in there with the microbes, you get much better plant growth. So, and you see that the soil itself looks different. On the right, you see like dry dead plant material. On the left, you see a lot of black. That indicates that organic matter has been transformed by the animals, and the nutrients in that organic matter are now being released more, and the little tree can grow better. So just to put the soil, the big things in context, here's a little diagram of the major types of soil life. Now we call them functional groups because to a good approximation, they have, you know, there's things in common. So the mycorrhizal fungi, they have one functional characteristic. Then you have decomposer organisms, nitrogen-fixing bacteria, rhizosphere bacteria, free-living soil bacteria, and then a whole lot of little animals like nematodes and mites, and then the macrofauna, things like earthworms, termites, ants, and sometimes beetles. And then there are things in there that are not just decomposers, but are also predators. So the soil is a whole nother little world of different animals and things interacting. Then we know that mycorrhizal fungi are helping the plant obtain water and nutrients, but there may be pests, pathogenic organisms also living in the soil. However, with a healthy, balanced soil with good populations of the beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi, non-pathogenic nematodes, ordinary soil animals like earthworms and termites and so on. Pests and pathogens tend not to be a problem. So this term decomposers, though, that refers to almost everything in here except for the predators and parasites, because all of these organisms do something to break down organic matter. Plant leaves and stems, plant roots, they die. And something has to happen to that dead material. And that is what is going on with decomposition. So back to the specific cases of earthworms and other things. It depends a lot on the climate and vegetation and sometimes on soil qualities like the soil acidity. You can get places in Europe, for example, where you can have more than 1,000 metric tons per hectare per year of soil that is consumed and defecated by earthworms. So you could go through the calculation, we won't, as to how long it would take to get the whole of that topsoil eaten. We could try that as an exercise maybe. Burrows and chambers. So when an animal digs in the soil, it often leaves a burrow, a hollow space behind. And if you look at those under great detail, you can find over 100 meters of these tubes in the soil created by earthworms. And you can have thousands of earthworms per square meter or only hundreds per square meter, but it's still a fairly large amount of animal activity. They're often the most abundant type of animal in soil. It does depend on how much water there is. But as long as there's 3 to 5 months of rainy season, you can have earthworms living, or if there's irrigation support. Earthworms tend to create concentrations of organic matter on the soil surface or in the soil itself. And they can consume almost all of the surface plant material that plants create in a year. Again, it depends on population. Drier places or places with low earthworm populations, it won't be as much. But they can do quite a lot. Yeah, I'd forgotten that this time when I click, it brightens up. Okay, so that's about structures that earthworm create. Their fecal pellets, the casts, are a structure. They are hot spots of microbial activity. And then, of course, they create their burrows and other structures. Depending on earthworm species and habitat, you can have rather large cast structures, even 10 to 30 centimeters tall. And these are, again, as I mentioned briefly, hotspots of microbial activity. This is where, fresh out of the earthworm, there's a whole different community of bacteria that's active. We sometimes call this the Sleeping Beauty. You'll know the legend of the Sleeping Beauty, this fairy tale?
Yeah.
When the prince comes and kisses the sleeping princess, she wakes up. So in this case, the earthworm comes and kisses the soil, or it eats it, or eats some piece of organic material in the soil. Then there are bacteria that wake up when they get inside the earthworm. And then they finish their job. And then when it's defecated, more different kinds of bacteria, they wake up. And so there's a whole succession of bacterial activity following that soil getting eaten by an earthworm. And this has a big effect on the amount of available nutrients that are in that soil that the worm has consumed. They make it available. They don't just gather these nutrients together, they actually change the form so that plants can get at those. Those have an important function in aeration. So air can move within the soil and water can move within the soil. Water can enter the soil, air can enter the soil. If you look at bulk density of soil, how many kilograms per liter there are of soil, you quickly figure out that it's not as dense as, say, stones or clay where it's been packed and there's no airspace. Soil contains air. It may not look like it, but maybe up to a third or a half of the volume of soil is airspace. It's often very small airspace, but it's there. And having larger pores created by burrowing animals such as ants, earthworms, termites, beetle larvae connects those pores in the soil with the surface and allows the movement of air and water. My colleague Patrick Lavelle from France has been very lucky with his camera. And you can see these white lines are plant roots growing down through an earthworm burrow. And you can see that the end of the fine roots is making these little, almost like sucker pads that go to the wall of the burrow, because that is also a very enriched place. The earthworm's excretions, its urine, are concentrated in these wall linings of the burrows. So that is for the plants, this is a great place to send a root. The left photo is a cross-section of soil where they carefully picked away the surface so that they could see the burrows. And so all of these black dots are earthworm burrows coming from the surface of an agricultural field and going down. So now we can try.
Got a question, Sam?
Yeah.
What component of the urine of the worm is actually
What nutrients are in earthworm castings?
Typically, everything that was in the soil that they ate. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the big three, and all of the so-called, the micronutrients, they'll be there too. But the difference is that they go into the earthworm at low availability. When they come out, they are much more available to plants. They've been made soluble. They have changed form and can now be taken up by plants. The urine itself is enriched in nitrogen, just like any animal urine. But it's all, of course, just what was in the earthworm's diet. So they absorb nutrients from the soil. That's how they live. But they excrete their wastes like any animal. But they also increase the availability, the plant availability of nutrients in the soil, even the stuff that they did not actually absorb. It just passes through and comes out more available.
Another question.
Yeah.
So what about the slime around the outside of an earthworm? Does that have nutrients? Does that impact the soil? What's up with that?
That slime is mainly to keep the earthworm moving easily in the soil, but there are probably bacteria that will eat that. slime, whatever rubs off on the soil. But it's another interesting thing you will not see. There are many species of earthworms, especially some of the ones in tropical climates, secrete a lot of slime or mucus directly into their gut. So they swallow the soil and then they secrete this mucusy stuff into their guts. And that is to wake up some of the bacteria. And with that help, the bacteria, they're getting some energy from the worm in this mucus material. With that help, the bacteria go to work on the soil and generate available nutrients. They generate more bacteria too. So the earthworm can actually wake up the bacteria, cause them to grow. Those bacteria can mobilize nutrients from soil particles and absorb them, and then further down the worm gut, the earthworm will digest those bacteria. So they don't get something for nothing, the bacteria, but they do serve a role in the earthworm's nutrition. And again, they don't all get killed. So it's this, again, it's this, the Sleeping Beauty thing, but on the inside of the worm, where they wake up when they get that big dose of what to them is food, and to us just looks like mucus material when we open up these earthworms. Okay, did that answer?
Yeah, it was great.
Okay, let's move on. You can put on the, so if you feel like, okay, here's a something to do a little calculating just to give you an idea how much earthworms do. Let's assume that there's 100 grams of worms in every square meter, and each one eats 1 gram of soil per day. So how many grams of soil do they eat per day? And then we've got 200 kilos of soil per square meter, just the top 20 centimeters. How long will it take the earthworms to eat all of it? Now, maybe it's been a while since you had to do this kind of thing.
Anybody attempting this one?
About 1 worm.
100 grams.
100 grams of worms per square meter.
100 grams of soil per day will get eaten if each one eats 1 gram per day.
So there'll be 2,000 kilograms per, or 2,000 grams per square meter.
Let's see.
20 days.
For no, not 20 days. It's just, yeah. 200 kilograms would be 200,000 grams.
There you go. I don't know, Sam. What's the answer?
Wait.
Oh, wait. No, don't tell us.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
We got the answer of it's a lot. Any guesses, Femina?
No, we can say it.
All right. What is it, Sam? Spill the beans.
I think the accountancy person should be able to figure this out in like 2 seconds.
I know. It's okay. 1 kilogram is 1,000 grams.
Oh, she's trying now.
100 grams at the 200 kilogram. 100 grams.
I don't understand the 20 centimeters. You have to
Oh, it's just giving a limit of the soil of a square meter. You know, the top 20 centimeters of a square meter of soil. So it's not a cubic meter. It's a meter by 20 centimeters deep.
Calculate, divided to 200 grams.
The papers and pens are coming out. It's happening.
Okay, let's get this done.
1,000 grams and then multiply with 20.
Yeah, but
8 kilograms
1 grams works.
1 kilo is 1,000 grams. So that's 100 grams.
I say there's not enough information. How many earthworms?
Well, 100 grams of earthworms.
How many earthworms?
Each gram, let's say each gram of earthworm, let's say it's 1 earthworm it weighs 1 gram and it eats 1 gram of soil per day. We'll just do that. So
One. Write it down.
2,000 days.
Yeah, 2,000 days.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah, there it is. Barbara without the paper. Here we go.
He had his phone though.
Oh, I had his phone out. Oh, jeez.
Yeah, okay. Phones will do everything. You could just say, hey, Google, how many grams of... Yeah. Oh, we need an Alexa thing in there or a Siri, Apple to answer these questions.
We'll invest in that next year.
Ugh, this is weird. My phone just did that. I asked, I said, hey, Google, and then it heard me and it says, oh, well, how many grams of what? Okay, I can just stop that. Okay, so yeah, 2,000 days. So a long time, like 6 years, 5 or 6 years. But that's not that bad. That's actually pretty good. Because it just means that that whole top layer of soil is going to be eaten and it's going to pass through an earthworm on that farm every 6 years, approximately. The real calculation is more complicated than that because they might eat some of it twice. Like a year later, they'll eat the same thing all over again because it sort of stops looking like earthworm feces after a while. So we often say, that soil is just earthworm gut content that's just temporarily not inside an earthworm. But, there's other people, don't look at it that way. So anyway, so just up to this point, we've got these soil engineers are these larger bodied soil animals that eat soil, eat things in soil, they move soil, they create structure, they create holes, they allow other organisms to live in their own ways within that soil. So they can do a lot with the physical layering of soils. They can mix vertically, so subsoil lower down can be brought to the surface and topsoil can be buried deeper. So they tend to homogenize, or they tend to mix the soil. The top 20 to 30 centimeters of soil is getting mixed. And that helps to build soil. Instead of just a thin layer of organically enriched soil at the surface, they help mix it in. Termites, so these are the ones we all know from, they're eating your house, but they're eating dead trees. And there are very many different kinds of termites in the world that do different things. So that's what I just wanted to bring out here. You can see the man here in the bottom of the termite condominium. Yeah, this is like, if he's even 2 meters tall, this thing is 8 or 9 meters. But termites do different things. Some of them eat grass. Some eat wood, you know about that. Some will bring plant material to their nests and they grow fungus. And then they eat the fungus. And others actually eat soil, and they digest the organic matter in the soil. So if you catch a termite like this, and they're often very soft, very delicate, and their bodies are full of soil. That's because they are living mainly underground, making little channels through the soil. They eat their way, and they bring soil back to their nests, and they build their nests out of a mixture of the material they transport because they're eating it. They use their own fecal material. So basically, they live in houses made out of poop. But it's a whole mix of things. It's not just eating dead wood or houses. There are many different roles that they play. So they often create these visible structures of nests above the soil. Do you have that in Curacao? Not the ones living in dead wood or dead in a house, but that they make these heaps.
Yes. Yes.
I have a lot.
Multiple people have multiple termite homes on their land.
Here the birds can make the nest.
Oh, really?
Yes, the
Yeah.
parrots. The little
So
parrots.
birds will even use them to make nests in them after a while.
Yeah. So then the people, has there been any advice on what to do about these termite nests out in the land?
We have the lab professionals comes and
Mostly it's spray them with chemicals.
Ah, okay.
and
Okay, tell me.
Just
I need a
feed them,
solution.
give them food. Yeah, provide them food with food.
in my case, I leave them like that because I see birds make nests in it. So certain places I just leave.
Some people are willing to leave them. Others are anxious for an organic solution to get rid of them or manage them.
Right.
It's fine. I'll get the come to my house.
Well, I guess the question then is, what are they eating? It's because
The old the tree they are eating.
Yeah, they eat like sick trees.
Yes.
Not even fully dead, but sick and dying trees.
okay.
What else?
And anything else? It's worth finding out. If you're not sure, if it's just a termite nest out in a field or underneath some trees or something like that, but it's in a visible above ground structure, those could be soil feeding termites. They could be wood feeding termites. They could be another kind. They could be growing fungus in gardens in their nests. But it's not always the case that they are pests. We tend to think of them as pests because of our experience with the houses. But I'm not an expert in termites. I do know just a little bit, but it might not be worth the trouble to try to kill them off. It depends on what they are doing. So that is it's a good question, something to investigate. What kinds of termites are there and what are they doing? Because there are so many different types.
I have a question.
Got a question.
What happened? Let's say they come to a wooden house and you see like they make a line going into the wood, and you break that nest which is out of the dirt. And what will happen? Because they always will go back to the dirt. Let's say you throw something in the dirt and you break the nest. Will they disappear?
They might disappear. You would have to really completely destroy the nest, and you have to get the termite queen out.
How? Oh my God. So in the wood, I have to look for the queen?
Do termites eat like sugar water or anything like that?
No, You know, they're very, you know, if they are going into your house to eat the wood of your house, that is a particular kind of termite that it is worth trying to find a way to get rid of them. Sometimes they will live inside the wood. It depends on the kind of termite. I remember in the Philippines waking up one night with things crawling around on me, and it was termites. They were living in the bed frame, the wood of the frame. And they were emerging to come out and to fly away.
Oh my God. Lucky you, Sam.
Yeah. You know, there's just days in the season when suddenly the termites are out flying around, and they're out mating in the air, and then the females drop down to the ground, take off their wings, start digging a hole, and start raising babies. Or they land on some wood and find a nice house to eat. So,
Another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
How do you distinguish the termite?
How do you distinguish the types of termites? Is it just their behavior, or is there like a visual cue, or what?
That is a difficult question for a non-termite specialist like me. But yeah, I would say if you have a local, like a government agriculture office with information about termites, you know, an entomologist, you should ask that person. Because there could be many different things. Sometimes the structure of the nest, you know, the above ground nest, that will be very particular. Certain kind of termite makes that shape. Another kind will make a different shape. Or like the ones you saw that are on a tree. Okay, not all termites do that. So those will all be different depending on where they build their nest, what material they're using to build it. They often make they'll make little tunnels, like it'll be on the, someone said earlier, on the surface of the house. They take ground up wood particles and glue them together and make a little tunnel so that they can walk around undercover. You know, and you break that open and you will see termites, and then but they will fix it. They'll rebuild it.
Do termites have natural predators besides like the termites?
Do termites have natural predators?
Yeah, some birds probably eat them. Some lizards will eat them, but mostly it takes something that's strong enough to break into the nest and get them out. So that's one of their defenses. You know, some of these nests are very, very hard. You know, you hit one with like digging tools and it just bounces off because they have created a glue with their like their termite spit or something. But it hardens and becomes very durable, waterproof, takes a lot of digging to get into it. So in continental areas, things like anteaters are usually actually termite eaters. Some of the armadillos, the pangolins, you know, there are animals, generally slow-moving animals with really big digging claws that are designed to allow that animal to break into a termite mound, and then they put their tongues in the holes and the termites grab on to counterattack, and then the animal just pulls its tongue back in and sucks the termites off. Some monkeys will do this, though not so many. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that could be eating termites. But again, it's just so much depends on where you are. You know, you don't have anteaters there, I don't think.
So you could maybe reference I mean, there's not a strong agricultural reference system here on the island, but any universities in the Caribbean would probably have studied this to some extent.
Yeah, I would try University of West Indies. So they would be possibly useful for the drier climate areas on those other islands.
Yeah.
What they've got.
You just said that
Oh, really? If it's made out of wood, yeah, probably depending on the material it's made out of. If it's made out of wood, yeah. A comment that termite nests can be used as a replacement for charcoal, if potentially.
Ah, yeah. Well, termite nests in some. There's been a lot of research in Brazil on termite nests, and so this is for climates that have a strong dry season and strong rainy season, but it's mostly applicable to grazing land, to pasture land. And their research indicates that it's better economically or agronomically to leave the termites because they do not reduce total productivity of the grassland. So even though you look out and you see 1,000 termite colonies per hectare or 500 or something like this, and you know that colony does not support grass. Nothing is growing on that. But the area around it grows more grass, enough to more than make up for what the area of the colonies was.
Another
So,
question.
yeah.
Also that bees make a nest also.
Ah. So
bees might make a nest in colony as well.
So like an old termite mound, old termite colony.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other
Yeah.
questions?
Other animals too. Yeah. Others.
All right.
The birds, only the birds and the bees I have on my farm. The birds make nests in it. You see how they open it with their mouth and make the holes and go lay eggs in termite nest, and the bees them around them. They live there too.
So this is a really useful feature. You know, this is a great engineering thing that the termites have done. They build those structures, and then you have other animals that could be quite beneficial, such as birds that be eating insects. Bees are there pollinating. They're taking advantage of these termite nests. So it's a piece of the whole system. You don't want to just go out and destroy all termites. You should know, what's that termite doing? Is it causing any harm, or is it maybe causing something beneficial? So they are the termites move a lot of soil. They are very small, but there are many of them. So 45 tons per hectare per year of soil, or whether it's only 10 tons, it's still a lot of soil that they're moving around. And they make a lot of little burrows. They make chambers within their nests or within the soil. Because there are termites whose whole life is lived below ground. You don't see their nests, but when you start digging, you might find them, particularly if you're digging in a natural forest area or some area of vegetation that does not get disturbed regularly by agriculture. So if there's a stability of the environment, then you would have soil inhabiting termites more abundantly. So they can make large concentrations of carbon and nitrogen. And they also can, they don't always take the soil as it is, a certain amount of silt, sand, clay particles. They may choose the sand or choose the clay or something, because if they're going to make a structure, it's easier to make a structure out of clay particles. So they can reorganize the soil at a very fine level of choosing one kind of soil textural element to build with. Of course, eating soil for food, it's the clays and silts, it's the fine particles and fine organic matter that they will utilize. Sand doesn't hold on to things. It doesn't hold on to organic matter very well. It doesn't hold on to water very well. So they may leave that behind. An old mound might get abandoned. The nest may die. Birds might move in. Bees might move in. But it might happen later that a termite will arrive and then recolonize that same nest structure. They can also be places where, because of the lesser influence of large animals or people with tractors, you can start to get reforestation taking place around termite mounds. So some plants will grow right next to them or even on top of them. So you get a lot of different processes going on around these termite colonies. Even in agricultural land, there are some termites that can survive. So this is an experimental plot, probably Australia, indicating that on the left you had no termites and conventional tillage, and a no-till adjacent area with termites in the soil had a very different soil structure and looks healthier. On the left, it looks very kind of flat and sandy, and on the right, the soil is more protected, and it will have more organic matter in it, and it will be less subject to erosion. Having all of the burrows and pathways in the soil means that when the rain comes, it can go into the soil and spread into the soil faster. It doesn't have to soak in through a dense crust of the soil on the surface. That is a very important function of a lot of these soil engineer animals. Ants. Okay. I'm sure you have plenty of experience with ants. Maybe some of it is not very good.
Maybe we should take a quick coffee break. Just like
Coffee break. Yeah, good idea. It's been a while. Sorry, I tend to get carried away. So Chris, you'll have to be the referee.
Good. We need more excitement around soils. Sam. Here we go, guys. Whenever you're ready, Sam.
Okay. So, are there any fire ants?
Are there any fire ants here, guys?
What's the difference?
I don't think so. Could
No
you
fire.
explain that a little better, maybe? Like what makes a fire ant a fire ant?
They're small, brown, and if you disturb them, they start climbing up on you and stinging in large numbers.
Yeah, they have some, but I don't know if they're fire ants. I mean, they attacked us when we were making the. Yeah, so we got attacked by some when we were making the compost pile the other day. But,
Okay.
yeah, they bite.
Yeah, there are those, and there's biters and there are stingers. So,
So I don't think there's stingers.
Yeah, well, these are. Well, if you don't have the fire ant, you're lucky because they are pretty widespread now. Okay, so most ants are, we know them. They're digging holes in the soil. They make their nests underground, and so that means they're moving a lot of soil. I mean, that's pretty obvious right away. You can tell that they're going to be doing something that modifies soil structure, taking soil from below and depositing it up on top of the surface. So that helps soil continue to move. All of these animals, earthworms, termites, ants, we think of soil as this stuff that just sits there. But if you could just sit and watch for years, you would see that the soil is slowly moving. It's being stirred by the animals that live in it, by the plants whose roots penetrate it. It's constantly changing, and ants are one of those things that does it. So they move soil because they're building nests. They collect food, which can be, most ants are predators, so they would be collecting food by attacking small insects or other small animals and bringing that food to the nest. That creates a place where nutrients from the wastes of the ants are more concentrated. So they create differences within the soil. So not just, is that they tend to concentrate certain things around the nest, and they may remove material from below the ground and spread it out on the surface. Okay, so then there are leafcutter ants. I don't know that you would have leafcutter ants. Maybe you do?
Yes, yes they do.
Yes. So this can be a big pest in agriculture. Is it a problem for you guys?
We have it. I've seen it only in the woods, like in the forest.
Only in the woods.
Some only in the woods. Someone else said yes. You guys see them? Yeah, some as pests, yes.
Yeah, so the leaf cutters, they take pieces of leaf, as you can see in this little photo, and they carry that back to their nest, and underground they have created little chambers where they grow fungus. So they're not predators, they're sort of vegetarians, but they gather the leaves from the plants and they carry them, feed the fungus, and then they eat the fungus. So they are just living on mushrooms. So they just build these underground chambers. So they have to move a lot of soil. They'll dig holes, they dig channels between. So they have like almost ball-shaped hollow spaces in the soil where they have fungus gardens. And that's what they eat. So they carry a tremendous amount of plant material. They create little roads. You know, if you're out in the forest, wooded area, and there are leaf cutters, you can find where they remove the obstacles from their path and create a flat road, and they carry the little pieces of leaves along those pathways. This is something you have seen. Someone said they have seen this, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a lot of text on this slide. It's just about all of the different results of the ant activity. It tends not to be particularly good in terms of soil fertility right around the ant nest, but they are still, they can be a very important herbivore. And there's a fabulous, if I can get it, oops, let's back up. There's a YouTube link on this page that I can't open it now because of the nature of this, where I am in the PDF. But
I could copy it over and play it here if you want us to.
It's just sort of fun. It shows an excavation, a team of scientists excavating a leafcutter nest. And they start by pumping very liquid concrete into the nest. Then they wait, and then they start digging out the nest. And it takes them weeks of work. And they reveal a massive underground structure, a city that's 3 or 4 meters down in the soil and has the extent of maybe a quarter of a football pitch, football field. It's a gigantic structure, and it was all made by millions of ants in this one leafcutter ant nest. So
I put it here, Sam. Why don't I bring it up?
Yeah, it'll take 10 minutes or so.
This is a 3-minute video. It's the one that I got.
3 minutes, okay, maybe. All right, we'll let her rip. If it is, in fact, the one I thought, but.
And there's a Aluminum castings, one, two. We could pop up here after this. Yeah, this looks like it, Sam.
Yep. See a bunch of guys pumping concrete down a hole.
Yeah.
For 3 days, they kept pouring until 10 tons of cement had disappeared down the tubes.
For 3 days.
After a month, they begin the excavation, led by Professor Louise Forci. It takes weeks to uncover the secret megalopolis of the ants. With the help of mechanical diggers, the scientists remove tons of earth. At last, they begin to see the structure of the city-state. There are subterranean highways connecting the main chambers, and off the main routes are side roads. The paths branch and lead to many fungus gardens and rubbish pits. The tunnels are designed to ensure good ventilation and provide the shortest transport routes. Everything looks like it has been designed by an architect, a single mind. But of course that isn't true. This colossal and complex city was created by the collective will of the ant colony, the superorganism. The structure covers 50 square meters and goes 8 meters into the earth. In its construction, the colony moved 40 tons of soil. Billions of antloads of soil were brought to the surface. Each load weighed 4 times as much as the worker, and in human terms, was carried a kilometer to the surface. It is the equivalent of building the Great Wall of China, the wonder of the world.
All right. We're impressed.
You're impressed?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, they probably killed all the ants.
Yeah, the ants didn't survive that filming.
Yeah, they had.
This is just something to sort of think about. When you think about, okay, so we've got all of these different 3 groups, termites, ants, earthworms. They make different types of structures. So, you know, we say they're all soil ecosystem engineers, but they're different in their effects. So, you know, the ants, okay, different ways that they move, they create cavities in the soil, but they tend to be sort of concentrated as a living space. Termites could be eating their way through the soil as well as digging holes and, you know, and creating living space, but they also create a lot more underground pathways if they are soil feeding termites or if they are using pathways to reach from their nest to a food source. So it's not that they're all doing the same things, and in fact they're doing very different things. And earthworms don't make nests, they just live in the soil and spend all of their time eating and burrowing and making no kind of fixed structure homes, except for a few that may live in one burrow for their entire lifespan, but it's not very long, and it's only occupied by a single individual. So they're more mixing and churning the soil than creating structure from it. But they do modify heavily the soil that they do process. So you would see that maybe there's differences in the way that they move nutrients around, the kinds of structures they make, and so this is, a point for thought. And I would say, instead of having us spend the time to work on this now, I might turn this into, say, a test question for the end of the week. So you are warned. Huh? So this whole thing then is just about the way that these organisms are moving soil and transporting it and restructuring it. So there's movement, there's transport, and so then there's the restructuring, and then transforming the components of soil. So those are three main things: just simply moving soil, or restructuring the soil, or modifying the components of soil. And earthworms they do all three, and one kind of earthworm or another may do only one, but overall earthworms do all three. Termites definitely transport. They can do a little bit of modifying of soil components, and they of course create below ground channels. Ants mainly move and restructure, but they don't modify the soil components themselves very much. Okay. So this is from your perspective as farmers or growers of plants, to think about what you have in your land. What kinds of are there earthworms there? Maybe, maybe not. You live in a warm climate with a long dry season, so that can be very limiting for earthworms. On the other hand, if you're irrigating some of the time, at least if you have enough water in the ground for plants to grow, then you have enough water there for earthworms, as long as it's not just desert type conditions. So the natural woody vegetation of Curacao is pretty close to enough, I would say, to support earthworms, but more likely that you'll have earthworms in cultivated areas because of the greater use of water. So what can you do? Well, let's take a moment to, what kinds of have you seen earthworms in your land? We've talked about termites, you've got those, and ants are everywhere. We may not be trying too hard to manage the ants, but termites might have some uses, or they might be pests, and ants mostly are beneficial predators of insects, except for the leaf cutters. And then earthworms are generally beneficial only in rare conditions. Can they reach very, very high populations, and in some soils they can cause the soil structure to break down. But that's very uncommon. So I'll just ask you guys a question, where have you seen earthworms, and you find them often or not so much?
Yes, we see them around. Where do you see them, Will? Okay. Generally where the soil is already in decent condition, maybe where they've been mulching already. Where else?
I see them by their gutter, where the gutter water
Oh, really? Yeah. So at the base of like gutters or where water collects, maybe. Where else?
I've seen them, let's say, dry land, but when it rains, you see them come up. And when it gets dry again, you don't find them. In spots where you think there is no earthworms, when it rains, they come up. See them.
So when it periodically rains or gets wet, you'll see evidence of earthworms, but they'll go away again when it gets dry. Oh, really?
Yeah.
Nice. In like a banana circle or a yucca circle.
Where I used to live, used to be like limestone, but also see them in limestone. They pop up through the holes of the limestone,
Yeah.
set up their casting, and then go back down.
So maybe going through holes in limestone. Anywhere else? And we saw some when we were digging around. Julian? On your place? Yeah. You'll see them? You see a lot of them? Nice. So, higher quantities in some areas for sure. I think was it when we were digging around at your place? I think we saw some. Oh, in those raised beds. Nice. Yeah, he's got some concrete raised beds, and he sees them in there. That's very fertile.
Good.
So they're around.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's interesting. There's only a little bit known about earthworms in Curacao. There's a few people have.
What?
When you dig,
That's where we saw them. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, at another farm, Barbalina's, we were digging around with the Broad Fork, and we saw them. They were in like little balls. They looked like they were almost hibernating, kind of.
Yeah. They do that when it gets too dry or too hot.
He was just saying that when it rains, you'll start seeing them moving around again.
Right. So they can spend months in that state, rolled up in a little ball. And once it rains, it's like instant earthworm. Just add water. You add water, and they wake up, and then they go to work. So they can go in and out of this sort of hibernation state, many times. If there's a big rain, they wake up. If the water all dries out, then they go back to sleep. So many species have this ability to do this, and so they can stand drier conditions or a prolonged dry season. So. All right. Well, it sounds like there's earthworms in a variety of different places, and this is I'd say a good thing. You've got some potential there. You provide the conditions, and then they will be doing well. So there's an old question: do earthworms make good soil, or does good soil make earthworms? And the answer is yes, both are true. So you can't get better soil just by adding earthworms. You essentially are feeding the soil as a whole community, I think. And earthworms will be part of that by helping process all of the things that you're feeding into the soil. But the big thing that they require is water. So if it's irrigation, okay. If it gets into higher salinity, then they will not be able to live there. There's a couple of very tough species of earthworms that are widely distributed in tropical regions that can tolerate slight salinity. You might have that present on Curacao. But we can look into this. So one of the things I'd like people to do is go back to your soil and where you have found earthworms before, and try to find some earthworms, and maybe you can bring them in and I don't know if we can find a way to sort of get a nice big picture on my end so that I can give a quick look and see what kind they are. But some things I can tell pretty easily from just a, even a cell phone photo or something. Or if you've got a way of putting a Chris's computer camera aimed straight at an earthworm. So one question I would ask as you're digging, as you're looking for earthworms, if they're all pink and don't move very fast, or if there are some that jump around and dance and maybe move like a snake.
Those ones are usually smaller, right?
Smarter, faster anyway.
Smaller.
Like thinner.
Smaller.
They have like a red color around their neck.
Maybe like smaller, have more of a reddish color.
Yeah.
Neck, like a band on them, maybe.
Yeah, they may have there are some species that have a reddish, red coloring or dark red-brown coloring on the very head end. And the band around the body will be a little ways behind the head. There's one of the most common ones that I'm quite sure is probably on Curacao as well, is all sort of pink. The band may be slightly yellowish or orange. And the tail end of this worm feels very sandpapery, rough texture all the way around the body on the tail end.
Yeah, yeah. They have these as pets for sure.
That's right. And sometimes this one, when it's moving, it will put out like a little tiny elephant trunk from its nose, and it will feel around as it moves with a very, almost like a pink thread. It's so small. But you'd have to stop and look at it to see what it's doing. And the same kind, it makes eggs that are, they start out as a kind of white ball shape in the soil. And as they mature, you can start to see the blood coloring on the inside of a baby worm growing inside.
Could those maybe be mistaken for like a fungus potentially, Sam?
They're smooth and sort of slightly milky color. I wouldn't say they're pure white. They're like a milky fluid appearance, except that it's a solid object.
So they wouldn't have any like threads coming off of them or anything like that?
Yeah, yes, no, but there's they wouldn't look dry threads. This kind of worm, often the mother will excavate a small hole and then deposit the egg case in that hole, and then it's suspended from the soil by one or two small threads. But ordinarily, if you're just breaking up soil and you see one of these things, you have destroyed the little chamber that they make. But once in a while you get lucky and you break open some soil, and there you see on one side the little egg case, where its mother left it.
So Julian has some photos of some earthworms that we found. Let's see if we can maybe make this visible to you. Let's see. This is going to be funny.
I probably have to stop the share of my screen so I can see it. Oh, that's a little one, isn't it? Maybe back up just a touch. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I can definitely see there's a worm there. More than that, I don't know.
Yeah. Here, maybe this will be a better indicator for you. Check this out.
Okay, yeah, that's quite a small worm. There's a bunch of species that are, even that can be an adult.
But one tip has yellow, and then it goes to kind of a pink color, and then more of a darker brown. I mean, that could be just the soil it's eaten. but its
Right.
end is yellow at least.
Yeah, that's okay. There's a lot to do figuring out what a worm is.
I don't know if you can quite even make that one out.
Not so much, no. It's just like a bright white mass.
Why don't I'll email these to you and see if you can make something of them.
Okay. Yeah, well, we can get to that.
Got a question?
All right.
Those, like you were saying before, those milky small ones, you see them like in a rotten tomato or in rotten fruit. I think those, what function does those have?
Would you see those eggs in like a rotten tomato or fruit, something like that?
No, not if it's earthworms. No, there could be other things. There's a lot of things that make little round, whitish, ball-shaped things. You know, some snails leave eggs like that, or some other animals, but no, not in a rotting fruit. That'd be something else.
Okay.
But they die fast when they see the sun.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
They die fast when they see the sun.
Yeah, well, earthworms don't like sun very much. They're like Chris, you leave him out in the sun too long, he gets really red and starts to feel bad. But for them, it only takes about 1 or 2 minutes.
All right. Well, I emailed them to you if you want to have a look.
Okay.
You got another question?
I have a question. Because
Okay.
at the moment I'm not really seeing how I can connect what we are talking about in connection with farming.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have these kind of things, you have to know what they are and then use them in your pharmacy or in your.
So, a question of relevance, I guess. You know, seeing these things, it's neat, but how does it relate to being able to grow food?
Well, let's see. I can answer this more from the sort of the earthworm side than, say, ants and termites and maybe beetles or other things. If you're seeing them, if they're present in numbers enough that you commonly see them, then I think that's a good indicator that the soil is in good condition and that you have a balanced community that's helping the whole nutrient cycling process. Because what I just did is sort of let's look at what the major soil organisms, the large ones, are, and then we'll go into more details about the nutrient cycling, what we call the whole decomposer community and how that cycles nutrients for the plants. So it's more that you might not be able to manage their populations directly. It's like, as I say, you feed the system, you feed the whole system, and the different components of it, like earthworms and fungus and bacteria, they come to life and work and, you know, with your plants. So that's the main thing. There are specific applications where, for example, using earthworm composting as an alternative to piles, to anaerobic digestion, things like that, where you don't need high temperatures. You only need to keep the earthworm's environment in the composting stable, sufficiently moist, and free of predators. And then they create a composted material fairly quickly, and it has high levels of beneficial microbes and a well-documented positive effect on plant productivity. So in comparison to best practices without using earthworm compost, people get 20-30% yield increases. Or if you're using it to start young plants to set out into the farm, you get much better growth and better plant health using a small amount of earthworm compost in the mixture that you start the plants. So apart from that, under normal field soil conditions, the presence or absence of earthworms can be a valuable indicator. Now, if the area has been farmed in such a manner using lots of toxins to kill insects, to kill nematodes in the soil, something like this, it may also have killed all of the earthworms that are there. So that means one of the major soil engineers is missing from that area. So in that case, you might want to be looking around the edges. Are there any earthworms there? Area that was not affected by this toxic environment conditions. Usually there will be, and they will find their way in. It's seldom economical or practical to try and get enough earthworms to populate your field. You kind of have to create the good conditions and then let nature take its course. They will recover that land. They will reoccupy it. So that's what I would consider as, this is the relevance. I think it's more, to me, it's like the creating some confidence in your practices, to know that these things are there and that they are an indication that something good is going on.
Yeah, that was great, Sam. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So I could continue with another section.
Well, we're at 8:10, 8:15. What's the kind of pace for the next few days? Because you've got the next 2 days. Do you have content to fill the rest of those out? Do we need to keep going?
We don't need to keep going. I think I can get through the decomposition and nutrient cycling by soil animals in one more session, and then I think the last one would be more on the sort of ecological or pest control kind of thing. Or am I missing a day there?
Yeah, we're not quite there. That'd be, well, let's see. We have soil engineers, soil fauna, organic matter versus fauna. Those are the three PDFs
Right.
I've got.
Yeah, those are so we've gotten through one and we would go through two more, and that would complete much of the sort of what the soil life is doing at the level of animals that we can see and their effects on things that we can't see, things that are small. All right, and then maybe there'd be another session.
What are you guys feeling? Can we go a little more? Good for the evening? What do you think? A little more? Go a little bit longer if you're all right with that.
Okay, let's roll. I will go back to the share the screen. All right.
I think it's his computer fan.
Yeah, I have a computer.
All right. So here's a nice big purple worm, and So there's this. Now we'll talk about the soil fauna as the way and how they function as consuming dead organic material. The fancy word is detritus. So these are things that are eating dead plant material primarily, and then they engage in the process of decomposition. So that's where a normal healthy soil community would be containing a diverse set of these organisms, ranging in size from something like earthworms all the way down to bacteria, the tiniest. So they're all working together, and there's really no way that you can separate bacterial action from any of these other things, because quite frequently even something like an earthworm depends on bacterial action in order to be alive. So this is just a kind of an overview of what a natural system forest would look like. There's NPP down here, the net. This is the primary production. This is what you could harvest every year. Some of that gets eaten by plant-eating animals, but most of it goes over to this thing called DOM, which means dead organic matter. And this is true for almost every area on the land, that the majority of the plant material ends up lying on the ground or deposited by roots underground, and it goes into this decomposer system. So when we're talking about soil animals, it's all in here, the decomposer system. We are the consumers. We're eating the leaves, the fruits, the nuts, the roots, whatever we're growing, but there's all this other stuff that is left on the side, the parts of the plant that we don't eat or the goat doesn't eat or whatever, that gets into the decomposition. And also all of the wastes, all of the urine and feces from these consumers also goes into this dead organic matter system. And it's not really dead. It's loaded with bacteria. There's a more detailed look at it, looking at, in the gray arrows is energy, and in the red is nutrients in organic matter. So here's our net primary production, the plants, leading to the dead organic matter from the wastes from the animals, from the non-eaten parts of the plants, and then those nutrients go into the decomposers, and eventually they come back around and support the growth of plants. So this is why all of these decomposing animals and the bacteria and fungi, everything, are important, because that's how nutrients come back from being locked up in plants and animals, how they come back to the soil. There's many ways to show this. This one's a little bit less abstract, and this includes also contributions coming from the soil and from the air, and even below the soil from the rocks that are the origin of the soil. So up on the left, the modification of rocks by exposure to air and water over the years. There's dust coming in from the atmosphere, many different things coming down onto the ground, getting taken up by plants, by microorganisms, and so on, and into this. But here in this bottom corner, this big pink oval, that's the decomposition. And you can see that sort of all roads lead there. Nothing happens if there's no decomposition. So when we're growing organically, we depend as much on decomposition as on anything else. You can buy organic fertilizers, but ultimately you do need to have your decomposer community working. Okay, and quite often, yeah.
What are heterotrophs? Heterotrophs.
Okay, heterotroph. Sorry, this is biology class, heterotrophs are us. You know, we have to eat other living things. Maybe we kill them first, but we depend on other life forms for our nutrition. A plant can feed itself from sunlight, air, water, and soil.
Be an autotroph.
An autotroph, yes, feeds itself. We eat pre-existing organic material.
Okay.
Does that explain it?
Yeah.
So yeah, all animals are like that. Except corals, but that's a strange story. Okay, so then at the bottom also is this thing called mineralization. That is when decomposition releases nutrients in soluble form or in plant available form so that they go back to plants. And sometimes there's almost no space between a decomposer and a plant because they could be transmitting it directly, like mycorrhizal fungi do. Okay, so your farm is taking inputs, and it can be from the atmosphere, it can be things that you buy, and then you grow plants, you maybe grow animals, you have people eating things, you create detritus, and then there's decomposition. The soil is the storage organ. You have places in the soil, like did Jimmy go over cation exchange sites or CEC? Yeah. Okay, so this is where these nutrients can be locked up in the soil, or they can be loose in the water that's in the soil. Even when you can't see water in the soil, there's still water there, and so on. So then you have, on your farm, you have export losses. So this is focused on natural systems, but a loss from the farm is also your crop that you take and you eat it yourself, or you sell it, or whatever, but it goes away from the farm. So then you have to replace that loss with input. So that would be purchased materials, or ideally it would be the wastes from the heterotrophs, the humans supported by that farm for their food. Their output in the detritus area would go back into the soil. So one of the important features of decomposition is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Have you guys gone over this at all?
Yeah. I've been talking about compost, and Steve talked about it yesterday, also about sourcing materials and making compost.
Right. So the carbon to nitrogen ratio basically is how many atoms of carbon to how many atoms of nitrogen are in something. So humans, animals, bacteria, all are right around 9 to 1, 10 to 1 for the C to N ratio. Organic matter from a plant, like particularly say dry grasses, straw, wood can be like 100 to 1 or more carbon to nitrogen ratio. And the bacteria are the heterotrophic microbes I mentioned in this third sentence. They can't grow very well on a high C to N ratio material. They need nutrients too. So that creates a problem during decomposition and in the assembling of compost, which is essentially, composting is a controlled or, a specially constructed decomposition process. That's what you're doing. You're setting up for decomposition. So the bacteria, they will absorb food at a 10 to 1 C to N ratio. So they have to, when they are doing the decomposition, quite a lot of the organic matter will end up going off to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. So typically for microbial growth, about 25:1 is a good starting point. But you often have materials that are higher than that. So there will be some loss initially. So one of the reasons why you compost is that decomposition is going to happen no matter what. But if it's a high C to N, greater than 25:1, you will have movement of nutrients, nitrogen as an example, from the soil into the organic material that's supposed to be breaking down. So it can increase the amount of nitrogen, and that will change that ratio. So even rainfall can contain some dissolved nitrogen, and it could be just in the soil as well. But this is one of the problems in composting, or why if you just say stir ground up crop residues, say straw, into the soil, it can cause a decrease in plant available nitrogen and other nutrients because decomposition has not yet completed its work. So there's different types of plant material. Wood is high in what's called lignin, and that is why wood is so strong. It contains this lignin, and that is also very difficult to break down. Even the bacteria are not very good at this. So you have this is a kind of experiment people do with samples of organic matter and of different types and leave them in different environments, and then after a fixed period of time you come back and see how much is left. So just to give a contrast here, at the very top, this one dot indicates that the initial lignin content was high, and after a year or two, still 90-some% of it is left. So this is like, there's a dead piece of wood on the ground and it could be there for years because it's so high in lignin and so low in nitrogen. But the materials that are in a much lower lignin, or they have a lower C to N ratio, they break down rather quickly. So 50% is gone in that same time interval. And so this also reflects the difference between warm and cold climates. So New Hampshire is cold, decomposition is slow. North Carolina is warm. Curacao is even warmer. So it could be fast. So with higher nitrogen rates, you get faster decomposition. And that's the main point of these slides. There's a lot more in here than you really need, but it's important that when you're considering the mechanics of composting and decomposition in general, you have this. Not all plant material is the same for other reasons. It could contain materials that tend to resist decay. Something that may seem medicinal to us, maybe it's also not beneficial to the bacteria. It can be difficult for them. But that's not so common. In crop residues that we normally use, that we would not have that problem. But there are other things that can be stimulating to microbes. So overall, how much of that original mass you lose depends on the starting material qualities. Leafy green stuff decays very fast. Wood, very slow. Anything in between, it'll be another story there. So this is comparing a bunch of different trees that we have in the north, but you would probably see something very similar comparing different kinds of trees, or say like banana stem, it's soft and wet and probably decays very quickly, but can still hang around for quite a while. Whereas fruit peels and leaves of discarded vegetable leaves, those are very fast in decomposition. And if you look into that, you'll find they have different carbon to nitrogen ratios, and the fast decomposing has the lowest carbon to nitrogen. But here's an oddity, and this is this bottom graph, or this middle one. The amount of nitrogen in the material can go up during decomposition, and that is because it's coming from another source. So this bottom graph indicates that over a long period of time, you get nitrogen is getting immobilized. It's getting sucked into the decaying organic matter and not being released from it. Then it switches over and starts to be released. But that depends on all of those fungi and bacteria getting busy on that material, and they're being assisted in this process by soil organisms that are helping break that material down. So it's a long, slow, and sometimes complicated process. It's not too much of practical concern, except in the construction or in the decision of what you're going to do with plant remains and how you're going to build a compost pile. So, for example, one of the methods that Chris is teaching is of using wood chips. Well, if you're going to use wood chips, you need to put in other things as well, right? So that you'll actually get some decay going. Because wood chips alone are very high C to N. They will break down, but it will take a long time. And there are beneficial effects of having that material in the mix that are not related so much to the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So if you just say put straw and stalks into the soil, that can immobilize nitrogen for a little while. Having soil animals in there to break up those materials into smaller pieces will accelerate the decay process. It'll make it go a lot faster because they are breaking it into little pieces, and more bacteria can attack the small pieces. And of course, those bacteria that wake up when they pass through an earthworm or a termite or whatever it is, those also are promoting the decay of that material and taking it past the immobilizing phase and into the releasing. So you've got carbon to nitrogen ratio, the particle size, and so big pieces have to be reduced to little pieces, and that's where the animals come in. And of course, then there's how complicated the organic matter is. Wood is the most complicated. So if you look at soil organic matter generally, quite a lot of it is what we call decomposing organic matter. So this is in a state of, it's in the process of decay. Then about an equal amount is what we call stabilized, where it's part of the soil. This is going to be there persistently. And then you've got living organisms, bacteria, fungi, animals, fresh residues like something that just fell on the ground or a root that just died. So all of these things make up soil organic matter. And there's a steady flow from living organisms to residue to decomposing organic matter. And some of that decomposing organic matter becomes the stabilized organic matter. And when we talk about regenerative organic agriculture, we're trying to increase that part, the stabilized organic matter. That's storing carbon in the soil, and that is providing a better basis of soil fertility and soil workability, the texture, the tillage qualities of the soil. And it's the living organisms that are taking all of those fresh residues and processing them into decomposing material. And finally, when it's decayed as much as it can, it becomes stabilized. Okay, was there a question or comment out there?
No, somebody's phone went off and they panicked and couldn't silence it.
All right.
How that goes, Sam.
So,
Is everyone sticking with this so far? Like, this is like talking about the breakdown of the organic matter in the soil and pulling nitrogen from the soil. This is why we've been talking about the 2 weeks. You wait a couple weeks from when you till things in before you plant. This is just the technical aspect of it.
Right. This is why you wait. So, this just indicates that most of the microbial activity and the animals as well, they're always pretty close to the soil surface, usually 20, 30 centimeters, not much more than that. That's like 90% of it is up there. It's most of the action is in the part of the soil that we actually can work with. We all know it's really hard to dig a hole more than 30, 40, 50 centimeters down. And of course, we don't ever need to manipulate soil that deeply, except possibly with this double dug raised bed system. But okay, that's another story. Okay, so soil earthworms, they like higher soil organic matter. That's the bottom soil carbon.
Sam, we got a question here.
Yeah.
Can you go to the previous graph? It's a little...
Yeah, this is a difficult one to understand. So this is soil depth from 0 to what, maybe, I don't know, 10 anythings, some units below surface. But so like the rooting zone of the plant. So microbial biomass, or the total amount of microbes, is high when we go this way, but it's only high. Imagine that you're starting deep in the soil and you're slowly going upwards. You would start to see more and more and more and more microbial presence. There would be more life there.
No. Yeah. Got a question, Ben? Okay, that was good. Thank you.
There are bacteria way down. You almost can't drill deep enough to find a place with no bacteria, but 99% of it is something is in the level you can dig up with a shovel in a few minutes. So earthworms like organic matter. You give them more and you will get more individuals. You feed them more and they grow faster. So both individuals get larger faster and they get more numerous. Then we have what's called the internal, I've kind of touched on this before. A cow or a goat or a sheep has what's called a rumen, one of the stomachs where digestion takes place, and it's digestion by bacteria inside that animal. So we talk about the internal rumen, that would be like the cow or the sheep or the goat, but then there's an external where it's in the soil. And so you get the action, you ingest something like the worm or the termite eats the plant material, the cellulose, and then it defecates, and then soil organisms, that bacteria that wake up inside the worm or outside the worm, they start decomposing that organic matter, and then that gives you the loss of carbon, or it starts to release the nutrients from that organic material. So this is all sort of this, the way that there are these positive relationships where, you know, the microbiome of the earthworms or the bacteria, the whole microbiome of the soil is a big system for breaking down plant material and recycling nutrients. That's what it's all designed to do. This is a strange little, so here you can see on the left side, I broke off a big pile of earthworm casting, and in the middle is the burrow, and there is a root. This is a root that was actually growing up. The soil level there, this is looking straight down. So a root was growing up into this worm cast. But also, can you see this on the edge where the leaf meets the worm casting? How it's black? And it's more light colored on the other side. This blackness indicates decay, that nutrients are being extracted from the soil of the worm casting by microbes as they try to break down the leaf material and use it for energy. So this is in a humid environment in Brazil, but this indicates that you've got a combination of nutrients. So this is what I was talking about, the immobilization. Nitrogen or other things are coming out of this soil of the worm poop and going into the decaying leaf. And eventually that decaying leaf will become broken down completely. So this is the larger picture of the same area on the right, showing a tremendous amount of earthworm activity and the decay of leaves falling on the soil surface. Okay. Then macrofauna. So this is animals increase microbial activity. Yeah. Question?
Well, we're at 8:45, so
okay, time. Yeah.
A breaking point somewhere coming up.
This is a good one. Let's just stop her there.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Any questions remaining from that?
No, I think we're good.
All right. Yeah, so a little technical at spots, but it's kind of all like foundation of what's going on under your feet, and also linking it to how composting is working as well. Though I'm sure you're going to be getting plenty on composting. But no, this is all applicable to aerobic composting. So anaerobic is another story.
So Sam, you had some homework you wanted to assign, is that right?
Yeah, if you can find a way to have this happen, then there's the Global Soil Biodiversity Atlas, pages 54 to 58. Those will give you a review of the three main groups of soil animals. If you continue past that, you'll see beetles, millipedes, what we call wood lice or other kinds of things. So there's a lot of different animals living on the soil, but I've tried to stick to the big three. But
this book is in a PDF. It's in the student shared folder right now. I uploaded it at the beginning of class. So this is a book. It just talks about soils of the world. It gives a less technical overview of different soils, different animal lives, things like that. So Sam, if it's the same pages you emailed me, or maybe you could just email me a very concise what pages you want them to read, and I can post that to a WhatsApp group that we're sharing.
Yeah, yeah, those pages,
Okay.
54 to 58, and then I'll see if there's any others. You know, if you want to go on in other areas, there's a whole section on bacteria, and it's fairly, you know, this is like an overview of what's living in the soil. So it's more for fun, but it'll give you an idea of what should be in soils. But the main thing was these, the most important categories of soil animals that you can actually see. That's what I wanted to focus on, and then how they're affecting decomposition processes. So.
And there was a couple other things. So.
Oh yeah, the going out and catching. It'd be. We talked about this already. Go try to find earthworms or whatever else. You know, whatever things are living in your soil, whatever kinds of little apparently decomposers or other soil organisms that you can find. I don't, you know, ants they're everywhere, but I don't know, you might find termites, you might find earthworms, you might find other things. One we didn't talk about is quite common in...
So what we want is for you guys to go out and find something, find some life. Bring it to class on Monday in a jar.
Yeah, like when you were 7 years old and you found something in the garden and you bring it into your mother and she screams. You know, that's the kind of thing we're looking for.
Blood will be on your hands. So what we want is we want you guys to go out and explore your growing areas. Wherever you're growing, whatever you're doing, find some life there, bring it to class. We want to see it. We want to talk about it.
Right.
We can compare to each other. We can send some photos to Sam. He might be able to identify them. We can talk about it. Also, if you can get them into a jar, bring them in. Also, something I want is we talked about the jar test last week, or the last few, whatever. We talked about doing a jar test on our soils. I want you guys to do a jar test. So go to your growing area, dig some soil up, do the jar test. If you need a review, go to YouTube, search jar test, soil jar test, something like that. Now, we're gonna not have a workshop on Saturday morning so that you guys will have time to just do this. So if you can do it Saturday morning, then do it Saturday morning. If you need to find it some other time, do it some other time. But we'd like you to come in with the soil life, a jar test completed, you know, come back with the percentages of your sand, silt, clay. And the PDF of this book is in the student shared folder. I'll send an app with the pages, but this is just a resource you guys have now. So I invite you to thumb through it at the least. Yes, sir.
Right.
All right. So Monday, bring those things to class in the evening. Well, then they die. All right. I'll see you guys Monday.
Monday it is then. Okay.
Thanks, Sam.
All right. Thank you.